Meridianville, and we're just thankful for him being here with us. Thankful for the good lesson that he brought this morning regarding marriage and beginning the series, building a base for it. We look forward to his lesson here in a few moments, the dynamic of trust. And each of these, it looks like they build on each other. And we just want to remind each other, we're thankful for our guests this morning. And we reminded ourselves over the last week or two about how we need to be praying for this effort, inviting others as the week goes on. It's just beginning. So we want to continue to invite, pray for the effort, but also make sure we attend ourselves as members here. Brother Lonnie shared some biographical things, and he's been married to his wife Jackie for 38 years. And I noticed he listed then his 3 grandchildren. No listing of children. I thought, that's where we're at. I'd probably do that now too. Just list the grandchildren and not worry about the children at this stage in life. But Brother Lonnie's a licensed professional counselor, a consultant, an author, an artist, a gospel preacher, a Christian. We're thankful for him and all that he does. He brings to the table a great wealth of knowledge and experience and education and understanding. And we're just thankful to have you here, brother, and look forward to what you'll bring us this week.
I think I turned that on. I never know. I was speaking in Arab, Alabama. There's such a place. It should be Arad, Alabama, but the postmaster transposed the letter. And when they sent him and said, "Hey, you got our name wrong," he said, "Deal with it." Anyway, so I went down to Arab, Alabama, and I had misjudged my driving time. It was before cell phones told you exactly when you're going to get there. I walked in almost late. The deacon in charge of the microphone was sweating. He handed me this little box, had a mic. I clicked it on, walked to the front, looked at it, had one button. Said no. Well, I didn't fall off the turnip truck yesterday. I'm not going to flip it to no. Things will blow up. Then I realized no is on upside down, and I turned it over. And so if there's an audio problem, it's my fault. My phone is tied to a glucose monitor, and for some reason it doesn't like it when I preach. And so I have to carry it with me. I'm not that tied to my phone that I bring it to the podium, but if I leave it in the pew, it'll chirp at me. And sometimes it just doesn't like the fact that I preach. And so it'll chirp. When you speak, your stress hormones rise and your blood sugar spikes. And so this thing will, although I'm comfortable preaching, my body still does the same thing. So if you hear weird chirping sounds, don't everybody look at your phone, it's mine. And I can't cut it off, or my wife thinks I lost my glucose signal, I'm passed out somewhere. So if it chirps at us, it will chirp at us. I would solicit that you find and listen to a little podcast I do every week. It's called Keeping Up with Jones, the Lonnie Jones podcast adventure. It's a very good, soft introduction to your friends that you might want to expose to spiritual truths. And we tell stories and make those stories have applications. We launch one every Tuesday morning. We're in our 3rd season. And if you're interested in those kind of things, would love for you to listen to that. It won't cost you anything, and it will help me out some to get more listeners. So we got the marriage go around. You've got romance. Romance runs into reality, and in reality you can run, you can recycle, or you can live in ruin, you can live in those doldrums, or you can build some skills. It's not the what you're dealing with, but how you deal with it. So all the way over on the other side of your chart, you've got the circle that says romance, you got a circle that says reality, you've got arrows that go up to ruin, or you've got arrows that go into recycle, or you've got this long arrow that leads to this pyramid. Now, if you remember being in the 5th grade, the food pyramid you had to draw. Everybody remember that silly thing? It's not just a triangle, but it had that extra leg. If you could draw that extra leg and make it look like a 2-dimensional triangle, you could sell that for $1. I can draw. I sold a lot of food pyramids. Lately, they've come out, Dr. Jason Fung in his book, The Diabetes Code and the Obesity Code, said that food pyramid was absolutely wrong. It was the worst thing we could be doing to our children in the 5th grade. So anyway, but we're not going to do the food pyramid. We're going to do the marriage pyramid. So you've got this pyramid with the 2 sides. The top of that thing is love. Love is the intentional, if necessary, personally costly investment into the good of another. It does not require reciprocity, and it does not necessitate that the person being loved deserve it. Well, how do you get to an attitude like that? We get to an attitude like that through intimacy. And intimacy is not just sexual intimacy, but it's the closeness. Do we share the same worldview? Do we have the same problem-solving style? Do we share the same mythos? Or even if we don't like the things that our spouse likes, we at least share in it with them. My wife is an NCAA basketball fan. She said this is the most wonderful weekend of the world. You sit down on Friday and there's nothing on but basketball. We drove from Colorado to Tennessee one time in order for me to preach. We've been out snowboarding and we had to go all the way over to, it wasn't Tennessee, it was Brownsburg, Kentucky. And she plotted our trip during the NCAA tournament. She said we'd drive this far and then a ball game's on. And so we'd stop at a hotel, order pizza, and watch basketball. And went from Colorado to Brownsburg, Kentucky, stopping and watching basketball. She filled out 4 brackets. Now, thanks to Purdue, none of them are worth anything because that was a dumpster fire. But anyway, she's eat up with basketball, and I'm 5'4", and I'm Caucasian. Basketball means nothing to me, okay? My number when I played was 5. That's how many fouls you get, all right? If on the last great day you have any fouls left, you were wrong, all right? I just stand there in the paint and bring that weak trash in here, I'm going to hurt you. And then I go sit on the bench. I can't play basketball, but because she watches it, I watch it. And because she's interested in it, I try to be interested in it. That's what a shared mythos is. And so intimacy comes when you learn to tell your spouse that I get your world. I do these silly little hand motions sometimes. This is my hand motion for cognitive dissonance. Okay? I can deal with this. I can deal with this. I don't really know what to do with this. So when people give me information and it's incongruent, I do this. The other hand motion I'm famous for is most of our conversations with people look like this. They should look like this. That builds intimacy. I know the world from your perspective. I don't have to agree with it. I don't have to think it's reasonable. I don't even have to think it's rational, but I get you. So this idea of love's an attitude. You can't develop that attitude until you've got this closeness. Till there's no walls, there's no separations, there's no barriers, there's transparency and there's vulnerability. And if this circle represents me and this circle represents you, to the degree that those circles overlap, we get the 2 = 1 principle and we become one person. Now, in order to have that kind of intimacy, in order to have that kind of connectedness, you got to have trust. And this is kind of where it gets interesting. How do you define trust? Most people define trust by using the word in and of itself. So how do you choose who to trust in your life? And how do you become a person that other people trust? In my experience, talking to couples, talking to corporate executives, talking to sports teams, and talking in seminars like this, most people can't give me a real handle, hands-on, this is how you make trust. And there's a book called The Science of Trust. And the conclusion of that book, The Science of Trust, is an empirical study based on some mathematical stuff. And they did an actual scientific study of trust. Trust boils down to a function of selfishness. Now you think about that for a minute. When you interact with somebody and they on a subliminal level or they on an overt level give off the signal that they're selfish, you don't trust them. And when you interact with people and they give off a signal that says I'm selfless, you almost intuitively, immediately trust them. Think about that a minute. Do you find that to be true? You know, I go over here to buy a new truck. You can deal with the guy at the truck lot that needs to sell a truck. You've all dealt with him, right? And then you run into the guy who wants to talk to you about what kind of truck you need. This guy doesn't care what color. This guy doesn't care what the wheelbase is. This guy doesn't care what the towing package is. He needs to move this truck and he wants you to buy it. This guy says, hey, you going to hunt in this truck? You're going to drive off-road? You're going to pull a boat? You're going to pull a trailer? What are you going to do with this truck? What do you need? You know which guy you buy the truck from, right? And you start thinking about that when we act selfishly, people don't trust us. And when we act selflessly, people trust us. In fact, when you read the dynamic in Ephesians chapter 5, wives, submit to your husbands as unto the Lord, and husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church, who gave himself for her. The reason the church was absolutely submissive to the Lord is the Lord behaved absolutely selflessly when it came to the church. Jesus was submissive to the needs of the church. So if you put a marriage into a formula that says, how do you make marriage work? I'm going to put your needs above my rights. So if it comes down to a right versus need, your rights always win. And in a lot of cases, as you get better at this marriage stuff, you're going to let their wants and their likes win sometime too. Now, if you're giving to someone's needs or someone's likes or someone's wants, and it always feels like you're giving in or giving up, that's wrong. You're going to become a scorekeeper, and the guy who's keeping score is usually losing. When I give to you, not giving in, not giving up, but merely giving, then I'm building this foundation. I'm not selfish. Therefore, you trust me, and because we trust each other, we have vulnerability, we have transparency, we have this open communication, and the longer we stay with each other and we're not duplicitous and we're not fake and we're not manipulative and we're not controlling, we build intimacy, and then that intimacy says, I'm going to choose to love you even when you have a bad day. I'm going to choose to love you even when you're difficult. I'm going to choose to love you when you live up to your capacity to be imperfect. And that's what makes relationships of any kind, work, church, home, neighborhood, in-laws, outlaws, or marriages, work with each other. So how to best describe this, probably the best description of it at all, was done by the Apostle Paul via the Holy Spirit. So that as he writes his letter to the church at Philippi, if you want to turn there, we'll be in Philippians chapter 2. When you read the book of Philippians, you get this idea that Paul and these people are super, super, super close. I mean, when you read their interaction, you'd think these guys are best of best friends. And probably Paul spent less than 21 days in that town. You read the book of Acts, he runs into some ladies having a prayer service by the river. He converts one of them. They go into town. While they're in town, they do a little bit of preaching. A girl with a demon follows them around yelling, "These men are the servants of the Most High God." And depending on how you translate that, it says, and after many days. So I don't know if many days is 2, 10, or 12. But after many days, Paul turned around and says, we're done with that, hush. Well, the guys who owned this girl lost their income. They accused Paul and Silas falsely. They get beat, put in jail. They're in jail singing praises. There's an earthquake. The jailer thinks everybody's escaped. I better kill myself because Rome will punish me for every person that escaped. He's about to kill himself with that short sword. He's probably a retired Roman soldier. That's what Philippi was. It was a place where Roman soldiers who lived long enough to retire retired. And he's got this cushy jail job. Now he thinks, oh man, I've lost my... And he's about to kill himself with that short sword. And Paul says, hey man, we're all here. They teach the gospel. They baptize this guy and his family. The next day, the magistrates come and say, you guys need to leave out the back door. Paul says, they didn't bring me in here in the back door. I think they need to come get me out. I'm a Roman citizen. I'm not guilty of anything. Paul set some limits on their behavior. And they go to a house. They strengthen the brethren, and they leave. That's Paul's entire exposure to the city at Philippi. And yet he writes this letter about their continued support. They send him gifts, probably monetarily, probably care packages. And so when you read this letter, this connection that they have, you don't have to be present with people to be connected to them. But this intimacy they share, they have common ground. They have a common mission. They have a common love. So as Paul writes to these people that he's super connected with, he's going to basically, in this really short section, give us a couple of prescriptions and a couple of proscriptions. A prescription is what the doctor says take. A proscription is what the doctor says stay away from. And so I've been given prescriptions the last couple of weeks, and I've been given proscriptions. I had stuff I had to do, stuff I couldn't do. I had a port in my arm. I had to take antibiotic infusions every 8 hours. You talk about a hassle. Wear this little silly thing, and the first line they gave me was short. So I'm like, I got T-Rex arms. I finally got an extension. But every 8 hours, I did presentations with an antibiotic in my pocket. And while I was talking, had to turn it on so it would drain into my arm. And it was 4 a.m., 8 hours after that, and then 8 hours after that. So I was up twice a night to fool with this silly thing. You got to keep it refrigerated, so you got to get it once and get it out of the fridge because it has a 3-hour cook time. And so I had a prescription, take this, and then I had a proscription, don't do anything fun. Don't run, don't do push-ups, don't do pull-ups, can't wrestle, can't rock climb, can't lift anything over a milk jug. So I had prescriptions and proscriptions. Paul does the same thing about our relationship. Now he's talking about church relationships. But if it works between the brethren, it'll work between a husband and wife. It'll work between people in a neighborhood. It'll work between people in a corporation. It'll work between people on a ball team. Here's what he says. Philippians chapter 2, and let's just start at verse 3. Let nothing be done through selfish ambition or vain conceit, but in lowliness of mind, let each esteem others better than himself. Let each of you look out not for his own interest, but also for the interest of others. So here I am, and I'm in this relationship, regardless of what it is. I've got the perfect relationship, then I run into the problems. That's romance and reality. And I decide I'm going to build some skills so that I can start with selflessness, trust, intimacy, and love. And the first thing Paul says is, hey, don't do anything out of selfish ambition. If I could speak or had to speak and somebody said, hey, Lonnie, you can only speak to this one audience one time on one topic, what you going to speak on? I'd talk about selfishness. The thing about selfishness hit me when I was in college. The common denominator behind all sin is selfishness. That's why oftentimes in the church we say that there's no difference in any sin. There's sin that has worse consequences. There's sins that have longer term things. But in God's eyes, my sin and your sin is the personal manifestation of selfishness in your life. That's why all sin is the same. James chapter 1 verse 13 says we're tempted when we're drawn away by the things that we want. The word he uses is either lust or evil desires. And drawn away and enticed in James chapter 1 verse 13 is the same word used for putting bait in a trap or a lure on a fishing line. I sin because of what I want. And so selfishness is the common denominator behind all sin. Selfishness is the antithesis or antithesis of love. The antonym for love is hate. But the antithesis, the opposite theory, is me being selfish, because if I'm only thinking about me, I don't think about you. I'm not other aware, I'm self-absorbed. Selfishness is the opposite of Christianity. If anyone would come after me, he must deny himself, take up his cross and follow me. You can't pick that cross up until you can put self down. And then when you talk about Christian maturity, you know, hey, how do I know this person is spiritually mature? Well, a person who's spiritually mature is not about how many appearances you make at a building. It's not how much money you put in the plate. It's not how many times you go overseas to do a mission trip. It's if you're spiritual, the Spirit produces fruit. The fruit of the Spirit, or the produce of the Spirit. What does the Spirit produce? If you're a spiritual person, love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and control of the self. Because until you get a handle on how you deal with self, you can't do Christianity. You can't be a mature Christian. You can't follow Christ. And you don't know how to treat other people. Love your neighbor as your... Hey, if I don't know how to treat me, if I've got too big a value on myself, I'm a narcissist. If I got too low a value on myself, then I don't have any self-worth, and I'm a dependent personality. But when I have a proper godly self-esteem, then I can put myself in your position. And if I were sitting in that pew or enduring this, or I were hearing that, how would I want someone to treat me? I can put myself in your position and act with empathy. When you read the theory of emotional intelligence, it boils down to treat other people like you'd like to be treated. Now, you read Goldman's book on that, and it's a lot more complicated, but really you sum it up when Jesus said, you love your neighbors yourself, you treat others like you want to be treated. That's emotional intelligence, and that's mental health. And so in a marriage, I can't do anything because I'm selfish. In a congregation, I can't do anything because I'm selfish. On a ball team, I can't do anything because I'm selfish. I got to watch the Super Bowl in a hospital bed. Yay. Did you see that guy catch the pass? And he's this far from the goal line to score a touchdown in the Super Bowl. Every little boy that's ever played backyard ball wants to score a touchdown in the Super Bowl. You know what this guy did? He stepped out of bounds. You know why? His team needed to burn time off the clock. Because if you step across that line and you score points, you give the ball back to Jalen Hurts with 2 minutes left in the Super Bowl, and that kid will score a touchdown in 2 minutes. Selfless. I could have a football on my mantelpiece the rest of my life. Say, yeah, I carried the mail in there in the Super Bowl. But he stepped out of bounds. Why? He wasn't thinking about himself. He's thinking about his team. Paul says, don't do anything out of selfish ambition. So when I start interacting with my spouse, when I start interacting with my parents, when I start interacting with my neighbors, when I start interacting with the congregation, I got to make sure self is in check. And I'm not going to do anything that promotes me over you or me over us. Your needs, my rights. And in a lot of cases, I can take your wants and your likes, and as long as I'm not giving in or giving up, but I'm just actually giving, love is the intentional and, if necessary, personally costly investment into the good of another. I just learned to give. I quit being selfish. And it's not about what I want, but what we need and what would help us. So Paul says, don't do anything out of selfish ambition. Number 2, prescription. Don't do anything out of vain conceit. Vain conceit basically means that we give ourselves this inflated price tag. We look at ourselves as if we're bigger, smarter, greater than everybody else around us. Avon Malone used to say, self-made men worship their makers. And it's a monument to unskilled labor, okay? When you start worshiping that you're, and I get it. There's smart people in this room. There's talented people in this room. There's people who have successful businesses, and there's all kind of talent here. My daughter is 4 foot 10 inches tall, and she played Division I volleyball. To my knowledge, she's the shortest person to ever step on a D1 court. The year that she played volleyball, their team had a contract with Nike. Nike made the shoes for Shaq and the shoes for my daughter. She wear a 4, all right? And so, when she started to go to college, we went for a drive in the country. I said, now, sweetheart, I said, you're probably the only Division I athlete ever to come out of Madison County High School. But you're not the only Division I athlete at this Division I school. They got them lined up like the Stones are in town to take your place. And you need to understand this about and she's got some God-given abilities. Her mother is an incredible eye-hand coordinated athlete. It just wears me out. I'm a strong person, and everything I do by bull force. My rock climbing is not that graceful gymnastic stuff. Is I'm trying to rip a rock apart and it doesn't yield, I go up it. That kind of stuff. My wife is super coordinated, and Lonnie Beth got Jackie's coordination, and she got my reflexes. I got a picture of her with her toes on the court, her knees on the court, and bending backwards and her ponytail on the court, and a ball going over her face to go out of bounds. That's how fast she is. That's how quick she was. And meaner than a one-eyed water moccasin. And I told her, I said, now sweetheart, I get the fact that this is a big deal, and they paid her $1,000 per inch of her height. That's not what they actually cut the deal on, but that's what, she's 58 inches tall, 4 foot 10. They paid her $58,000 to play volleyball. I said, that's huge. It's unbelievable. I said, but what did you do to deserve those little legs that are that fast? What did you do to deserve those blue eyes that can watch a volleyball come down? What did you do to have eyes and hands that coordinate to block that ball? I said, everything you're about to do in life, you're doing with a gift somebody gave you. You didn't do anything to get. You get that? You may be the all-A honor student. You may have scored a 34 on your ACT. But what did you do to deserve to have a brain that functions? What did you do to deserve to have eyes that see, vocal cords that work, hands that can write, draw, build, climb? Everything that we've done in life, we've done on the back of a gift somebody gave us. And that's, what did you do to deserve to be born in America? What did you do to deserve to be born in Southern America? Everything we have is just, we've done it on the back of a gift. So if for me to sit around and go, I've done this and I've got this and no, I can't be conceited like that. Because really, everything I do, everything I am, everything I can accomplish, I'm doing with a free gift somebody gave me and I didn't do anything to deserve. And it does bother me when an athlete stands up and says, we deserve it. No, you don't deserve it. You've got that incredible speed, that incredible strength, that incredible talent, and you didn't do a thing to get it. You walked out of the factory with it. Now, did you do good stewardship and develop it? Probably, but you're doing something with something you didn't deserve. So Paul says, don't do anything out of selfish ambition, and don't do anything out of vain conceit. Because if I start thinking of myself as great and wonderful and all that in a bag of chips, then I don't really know how to treat you because I'm self-absorbed rather than self-aware. So Paul says, don't do anything out of selfish ambition. Don't do anything out of vain conceit. Prescriptions. But in lowliness of mind, esteem others as better than yourself. He's talking about a cognitive shift. I look at me, I look at you, and I change the way I see myself, and I change the way I see you. Because I balance myself, and I'm not selfish, and I'm not conceited, and so I'm going to change the way I see myself, and I'm going to change the way I see you, and I'm going to make you the most important person in this thing. I'm going to put your needs above my rights. And a lot of times I can just put your wants and your likes above my rights. Because in lowliness of mind, a cognitive shift, I'm going to change the way I see you. A principle in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and I goof around with wrestling. I like to do that kind of stuff. A principle in wrestling is if I control your head, I control your body. I can have you lay on the ground, and I can take two fingers and stick them in your nose, and you can't turn your head that way. I promise you. The only way you can turn is that way. When you turn that way, I've got your back, and you're about to take a nap because you don't want me on your back. My little arms are short. You will go to sleep. If I control your head, I control your body. Well, if I control your head about what's right and good and pure and holy and righteous, then what you do with your body follows that. In lowliness of mind, esteem others as better than you. I'm going to control my head and say, hey, you're more important than me. You're more special than me. I'm going to treat my spouse, my church members, my neighbors, my family, and the people at work as if they have a position higher than me. My buddy Tim Oberson, who preaches at the Maysville Church of Christ, says the most ridiculous thing that can happen in human existence is a wreck at a four-way stop. I tend to agree with him. Now, you have a wreck at a roundabout because the fools get in there and just drive around. I don't know who invented that, probably the British. But a four-way stop is what? Everybody gets a turn. The only way you can have a wreck at a four-way stop is somebody goes, I'm going to take my turn, I'm going to worry about you. If I sit at that intersection and go, you go, you go, you go, nobody will ever hit me. But the minute I decide, hey, I'm going to get mine, Tim says it's the stupidest thing that can happen in human existence is a wreck at a four-way stop. One of the stupidest things that can happen in human existence is a fight in a church building because we've run through a stop sign. Because Paul says, stop. Don't be selfish. Don't be conceited. Change the way you see yourself and change the way you see other people. In lowliness of mind, let each of you esteem others better than himself. And then the next prescription is, let each of you look not only for his own interest, but also for the interest of others. Illness versus wellness. I versus we. Me, my, I, or us, and our. And when we start thinking about ourselves in community as connected, Paul never describes the church as an organization. He only ever describes it as an organism. And organisms work interdependently. They don't work dependently. They don't work independently. They work interdependent. And so Paul says, look, you can't just think about your stuff. You can't just think about what you want and what you like and what you're, but you also have to think about the interest of others. It's not an exclusion you lose yourself, but it's not an exclusion if you lose others. It's not only do you look out for your interest, but also for the interest of others so that we become interdependent. So when Paul talks about building that pyramid, love is built on intimacy, intimacy is built on trust, and the only way you can build trust is through selflessness. Well, like all good preachers, Paul's going to illustrate his sermon. So he gives his points. Don't do anything out of selfish ambition. Don't do anything in a vain conceit. In lowliness of mind, esteem others better than yourself. Don't look out for your own interest, but look out for the interest of others. Verse 5, let this mind be in you, which was also in Christ Jesus. Hey, you want to know what this looks like? You want to put some wheels on it? You want to see how it really looks on the road? You know, there's theoretical horsepower, and then you run it through a torque converter, and there's how much horsepower you get on wheels on the ground. This is wheels on the ground horsepower. Let this mind be in you, which was also in Christ Jesus. If you want to know how this works, you imitate the attitude, the mindset of Christ. Remember, love's an attitude, not an emotion. So here's the attitude of Christ. Let this mind be in you, which was also in Christ, who, being in the very form of God, did not consider it robbery to be equal with God. So Paul's going to illustrate his point. Don't be selfish. Don't be conceited. Esteem others as more important than you. And don't just think about you, but think about the interest of others. And he's going to illustrate that with the story of Jesus. And when Paul tells the story of Jesus, he does not start in the manger. He starts in the throne room of heaven. This is the story of Jesus, who, being in the very form of God, he was God, and did not consider it robbery to be equal with God. You walk into the throne room of heaven, and you've got these thrones, and you kind of go, oh no, where do I bow? You bow in front of any of them because they're all God. It's not inappropriate to bow before Jesus as God. Hey, Lord, when are you going to show us the Father? Hey, if you've seen me, you've seen the Father. And I'm not sure I'm smart enough to explain that to you. Father, Son, and Spirit. I know in John chapter 1, there's the use of what they call the definite article. The definite article is a little symbol you put in front of every noun that makes it a proper noun. It's like our capital letter. So in John chapter 1, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God. Definite article is there, God's name, and the Word was God. You got the word for God, but no definite article. So how do you translate that? In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God. The Word was a God, and that's not appropriate. In the beginning was the Word was with God, and the Word was deity. That's probably very, very accurate, but my mind doesn't handle that. I'm Oxford educated, but it's Oxford, Alabama. So there's a disconnect. I like to go, in the beginning was the Word was with God, and the Word was God's stuff. The same material, the same essence, the same substance as God. Now this is not 100% accurate, but it gets this little mind to mind to make sense. I put a cup of water on your table here. What's the chemical formula for water? H2O. I take that water and I lower the temperature, 32 degrees Fahrenheit, 0 degrees Celsius. It becomes a hydroxide. We call it ice. What's the chemical formula for ice? H2O. I take that water and I heat it up and get a little water vapor coming off the top of it. What's the chemical formula for water vapor? H2O. 100% water, 100% water, 100% water, but three distinct manifestations. Now, this is not modalism. Modalism says that God can only exist in one of those forms at one at a time. No. You can walk in the woods when it's cold. You get a stream with a layer of ice over the top of it. You got water flowing beneath it and mist coming off the top of it. Water, water, water. God distinctly exists in three different forms: Father, Son, and Spirit. And they're all 100% water. They're all 100% God. John chapter 17, Jesus is in the garden praying to God about the Spirit. He was God. Now, you want to understand how this selflessness stuff works? Then you wrap your mind around Jesus. Because He was God, and He came to earth as a man. And He could have been any kind of man He wanted to be. He could have had rock star status, and I hate to use the word rock star and Jesus in the same verb. But Jesus could have said, hey, I'm going to be doing miracles. I'll be at the Coliseum. And He'd have filled the Coliseum up every night, every venue, standing room only. But how many times did He heal somebody and say, hey, don't tell anybody what I've done? How many times did he leave the multitudes and depart to a solitary place just to be by himself or to teach his disciples? Jesus wasn't searching for popularity. Jesus could have been an entrepreneur. He could have owned everything. If you can turn stones into bread, you can turn stones into gold. Yet foxes have holes, birds have nests, and the Son of God has no place to lay his head. And Jesus could have been a powerful military leader. They come to arrest him in the garden, and Peter pulls out that sword. And Jesus says, hey, put your sword away. My Father will put at my disposal 72,000 angels. That's 12 legions of angels. We sing the song, he could have called 10,000 angels, and we miss it by 62,000 angels. He had access to an angel army. You read 2 Kings 19 where one angel kills 185,000 Assyrians. And if one angel, and we're not even told he was armed, one angel puts to death 185,000 Assyrians, multiply that by 72,000, how much destructive force could Jesus have commended at his fingertips? I made that statement in Miami, Florida one time. A guy walked out in the back after services, handed me a visitor's card. It looked like Wile E. Coyote had a hold of it because it had all these equations on it. He said, I'm an engineer. I said, I knew that. He said, I did the math on the kill ratio of 185,000 per times 72. Assuming you have a 10-hour day, you can destroy the world's population in 3.3 hours. But Jesus didn't come to be a general. Jesus didn't come to be a rock star. Jesus didn't come to be an entrepreneur. Let this mind be in you, which was also in Christ, who being in the very form of God, did not consider it robbery to be equal with God, but made himself of no reputation, and taking on the form of a bondservant, and coming in the likeness of men. And the man that he became was not a soldier, it wasn't a rock star, and it wasn't an entrepreneur, it was a servant. This is a special Greek word for servant. Now, the Greek language is not a technically specific language. You couldn't use a translation of Greek and do something, like in an engineering text. But the Greek language often offers us nuances. And the nuance behind this is you've got the word diakonoi, a word we use for servant, deacon, and you've got a Greek word called doulos, which means bondservant. That's how it's translated here, bondservant. A bondservant was the youngest, least educated, cheapest servant you could put in your household. And when people came to your house, the bondservant washed their feet. And you could buy one for 30 pieces of silver. You want to know how to change the dynamic of trust in this congregation? Between you and your parents, kiddos, between you and your spouse, between the people you work with or work for, between the people in your neighborhood. Don't do anything in a selfish ambition. Don't do anything in a vain conceit. In lowliness of mind, treat other people as better. Don't just look out for your interest, but look out for the interest of others. And try to imitate Christ. Because if anybody had the ability to say, I am God, kneel to me, it was him. But he came to earth, and he washed the feet of 12 men, one of whom was going to betray him. And his price tag was 30 pieces of silver. And because of that selflessness, the most popular book sold on the planet is the book that tells his story. The only religious system that doesn't say die for your God, but says your God died for you. Husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church, because he was submissive to the needs of the church. You want to change the dynamic of every relationship you've got, you imitate Christ, because Christ was not selfish. He was not conceited. He looked at other people as deserving more than he did. And he didn't just look out for his own interest, but looked out for the interest of others. Father, not my will, but your will. And if you want to change everything that goes on between you and your spouse, between you and your congregation, between you and your neighborhood, between you and your company, between you and your sports team, between you and any other human on the planet, this is how you do it. Let this mind be in you, which was also in Christ Jesus, who being in the form of God, did not consider it robbery to be equal with God, but made himself of no reputation, and taking on the form of a bondservant, and coming in the likeness of men, and being found in the appearance of a man, he humbled himself and became obedient even to the death of the cross. Sacrificial service. If my master is a servant, the greatest thing I can ever hope to become is a servant. Now, I hope that I've influenced, or at least the inspired Word of God has influenced how you go home today and think about all the relationships that you have. But before we leave this building, let's talk about our relationship with God. Love is the intentional and, if necessary, personally costly investment into the good of another. That describes how God treated me. God said, I'm going to take my sinless son, and when this guy lives up to his potential to be imperfect and deserves to die, my son will die for him. Intentional and personally costly investment into the good of another. And there's no upside of it for God. I can't do anything for God. I don't do anything for God. If I disappeared, it doesn't damage God. You know, when Paul talks to the pagans around all those altars, he says, in him we live and move and have our being. He was confronting. See, in order for Zeus to be powerful, you had to give Zeus sacrifices. And if you gave Zeus sacrifices, then Zeus could bless you. So the more you gave at the temple of Zeus, the more Zeus... Like Facebook. It was a self-reinforcing loop. The more time you spend on it, the more it gives back to you. And Paul says, we don't need that. In him we live and move and have our being. God doesn't need anything from us. We need everything from him. So there's no upside for God to save me other than that he chose to love me. Love is the intentional and, if necessary, personally and costly investment into the good of another. It does not require reciprocity, and the other person doesn't have to be deserving. And I'm absolutely not deserving of it. And yet that was God's relationship with me. And that's God's relationship with you. Now, if he can do that for us, why can't I do that for everybody else? Why can't I treat you that way? But this morning is, have you responded to God's love? You don't deserve it. You can't do anything for God, and God paid an intentional, personal price in order to reconcile and have a relationship with you. Have you taken advantage of that? And if you're not a baptized believer or you're not a faithful believer, we offer you the Lord's invitation. Ask you to fix that relationship before we spend the rest of the week talking about our other relationships. Please come this morning while we stand, while we sing.